I stood in front of the mirror applying light makeup, a habit I hadn't given up even at 77. Powder, a little blush, and lipstick in a muted shade of pink. My gray hair was neatly arranged in a simple but elegant style. After the death of Hank, my husband, I forced myself not to get down. Life goes on, even when you feel like it stopped. My gaze fell on the picture of Nate on the dresser. It was from 3 years ago. My son in a simple shirt, smiling, his arm around my shoulders in front of our old house. Back then, he still came to visit me every weekend. And now, 8 months of silence, not counting a short letter with a new address and a dry, "I'm fine, don't worry." I sighed, setting aside my blush brush. Nate had always been withdrawn, just like his father, but he used to at least call once a week. What could have happened in these months? Why had he moved to Sun Prairie, a city I'd only heard about as a place for the rich and successful? How could a simple programmer afford to live there? The questions multiplied, but there were no answers. I tried to call him several times, but only got to voicemail. I wrote emails and got short replies. Busy with a new project. Everything's going great. I'll tell you when I meet you. Well, then there will be a meeting. I woke up this morning with a firm resolve to stop waiting. I'm going to see him myself, unannounced. After all, I'm his mother. I have a right to know what's going on with my only son. I pulled an old suitcase out of the closet, the same one Hank and I had used on our honeymoon. It was shabby but sturdy, just like our marriage, which had lasted 42 years until Hank died. Started putting things away. Not much I need. The blue dress Nate gave me for Christmas 3 years ago. Beige cardigan, low-heeled shoes, the only pair I could walk around in all day without my joints aching. As I put things away, I remembered how little Nate used to spend hours on the old computer Hank had brought home from work. Other kids played in the yard while he created some program only he could understand. That kid is either going to go crazy with these machines or become the second Bill Gates, Hank joked. Maybe the second one did happen. The last time I saw my son was last Christmas, almost 8 months ago. He stopped by briefly, dropped off some presents, had dinner, and left, citing a work emergency. He looked strange then, tired and excited at the same time, as if he were on the verge of some important discovery. I tried to ask him about the job, but Nate just waved it off. Just a new project, Mom. Nothing special. I didn't think much of it at the time. Maybe I should have. By noon I was ready. I called my neighbor Ethel, asked her to watch the house and water the flowers. I took a cab to the bus station, bought a bus ticket to St. Prairie. It was a long ride, 4 hours on a stuffy bus. But it didn't scare me. I was used to much worse conditions than a modern air-conditioned bus. All the way there I thought about Nate, going through memories like old photographs. Here he was, 5 years old with a shattered knee, silently swallowing tears. He never liked to show weakness. Here's a teenager arguing with his father about the future. Hank wanted his son to go into engineering like himself. And here's Nate announcing to us that he's dropping out of college to go into programming. Hank was so angry, he didn't speak to him for 2 weeks. I mediated between the two stubborn men until they made up. When Hank died 5 years ago, Nate held firm, but I saw him suffer. He and his father were alike. Both hid their emotions. Both were stubborn and principled. Maybe that's why it was so hard for them to find common ground. After the funeral, Nate returned to his apartment in the city and immersed himself even more deeply in his work. Our meetings became infrequent and our conversations short and awkward. "Why don't you stop by more often?" I asked. "Work, Mom," he answered. "A lot of work." I didn't insist. I realized that work wasn't just a way for him to make a living, but a way to take his mind off the pain of loss. Hank never said it out loud, but I knew he was proud of his son, even when he didn't understand his choices. The bus stopped at a small station, and the driver announced the arrival at St. Prairie. I pulled out my suitcase and looked around. The town was much smaller than I had imagined, but it looked very well maintained. The main street was paved with cobblestones, and neat stores and cafes lined both sides. The people going about their business looked very prosperous, expensive clothes, well-groomed hairdos, fashionable accessories. I felt out of place in this city where even the air seemed to be saturated with money. My practical shoes and old-fashioned dress stood out from the locals. But I didn't care. I wasn't here for a fashion show. I was here to see my son. Taking a cab in the parking lot, I showed the driver the address from Nate's letter. Oh, it's in Hillcrest. The driver, an older man with graying hair, whistled. It's the most upscale neighborhood. Only millionaires live there. Millionaires? My Nate? I wanted to argue that there was some kind of mistake, but I didn't. After all, how would I know what my son had really been up to the last few months? Maybe he did make some important invention or his company suddenly became successful. Does your son live there? The driver asked, glancing at me in the rearview mirror. Yes, I answered briefly, not wanting to go into details. You're lucky to have a son, the driver chuckled. Now you'll live like a queen. I only smiled weakly. This man didn't know me at all and didn't realize that money had never been the most important thing in my life. Even if Nate did get rich, I wasn't going to take advantage of his fortune. It was enough for me to just know that he was okay. As we got farther away from the center, the houses got bigger and the lots around them more spacious. Finally, the cab turned onto a wide street with an avenue of spreading oaks on either side. Here the houses stood at a considerable distance from each other, hidden behind tall hedges and gates. Looking at these magnificent mansions, I could not believe that my son could live in one of them. Here every house looked like a palace, with columns, terraces, impeccably manicured gardens. Some were classical in style, others were ultra-modern structures of glass and concrete, but all exuded a sense of wealth and prestige. This way, the driver said, slowing down. Number 42. We stopped in front of a tall wrought iron gate. Beyond them, we could see a driveway lined with neatly trimmed shrubs that led to a 2-story modern-style building. The house wasn't the largest on the street, but it still looked impressive, with large windows, minimalist design, and a terrace on the second floor. Is this here? I asked, still not believing my eyes. Yes, number 42, just like you said. The driver nodded. I paid and got out of the car, pulling out my suitcase. The cabbie drove off, leaving me alone in front of the gate. There was a panel with a call button and a small screen next to it. I stared at the house beyond the gate, trying to realize that my Nate, my quiet, shy boy who always settled for little, now lived here. What had happened in those 8 months? How did he go from a humble programmer to someone who could afford a house like this? And why hasn't he told me about this change? What is he hiding from me? The sun was beginning to sink, coloring the sky with pinkish golden tones. A light breeze rustled the leaves of the oaks. The neighborhood was remarkably quiet. No traffic, no loud voices, just the occasional bark of a dog or the honk of a car on the next street. I stood in front of the high gate, clutching the handle of my old suitcase and gathering my courage. Despite the determination with which I'd embarked on this journey, doubt now gripped me. Perhaps I should have warned Nate of my arrival. What if he wasn't home or had important meetings? After all, judging by this neighborhood and the house visible outside the gate, my son's life had changed dramatically, but it was too late to back out. I pressed the intercom button mounted on the stone column at the gate. A few seconds of silence, then a click and a young male voice. Greenlee Residence. Can I help you? Greenlee Residence. It sounded so official, so foreign. Hello, I said, trying to make my voice sound confident. I'm Mabel Greenlee, Nate's mother. I'm here to visit my son. There was a pause, too long to be normal. Mrs. Greenlee? The voice sounded surprised, shocked even. One moment, please. The connection was cut, leaving me puzzled. Shouldn't the family be happy when the homeowner's mother visits? Or hadn't Nate said anything about his family to those around him now? A moment later, the gate opened silently. I picked up my suitcase and walked slowly down the paved path that meandered between ornamental shrubs and low trees. The garden was tended to perfection, not a single weed, not a single fallen branch. Everything looked like a picture from a landscaping magazine. As I walked down the path, I had time to look at the house. It was a 2-story modern-style building with large panoramic windows and a flat roof. The facade was finished in light stone and dark wood, creating an elegant contrast. The wide terrace on the second floor, the minimalist design, all looked classy and expensive, but completely different from what I would expect from my son. Nate had always been practical and unassuming. His last apartment I'd seen at Christmas was small and functional. Simple furniture, racks of books and computer equipment, no frills, no desire for luxury. How could a man who delighted in finding a $20 coffee table secondhand turn into the owner of such a mansion? When I got to the front door, it opened before I could knock. A young man in his 30s stood on the doorstep, tall, trim, wearing a light blue shirt with rolled-up sleeves and dark pants. His light brown hair was neatly trimmed, and his eyes studied me carefully. "Mrs. Greenlee?" He held out his hand. "Welcome. I'm Reed Halstead, your son's personal assistant." Personal assistant? At Nate's? This was getting weirder and weirder. "Hello, Mr. Halstead." I shook his hand, noting the firm but restrained shake. "Is Nate home?" Something strange flashed across Reed's face, like a shadow of concern quickly hidden by a professional smile. "Minus Mr. Greenlee is in his lab right now," he answered. "I'm afraid he's very busy and asked not to be disturbed for the next few hours. But I will inform him of your arrival as soon as possible." Lab? Not to be disturbed? What important business could my son have that he couldn't interrupt to say hello to a mother he hadn't seen in 8 months? "I'll wait," I said firmly. "I hope it doesn't take too long." Reed nodded and stepped back, letting me into the house. "Sure, let me show you to your rooms. You must be tired from the road." Inside the house was even more impressive than the outside. A spacious hall with a high ceiling, minimalist furniture, a few abstract paintings on the walls. Everything was kept in light colors: white, gray, sand. No bright colors, no personal items, no photos. It was like a showroom, not a living space. "Impressive, isn't it?" Reed noticed my scrutinizing gaze. "Though many of the rooms are still unfinished. Mr. Greenlee bought this house only 4 months ago, and he rarely has time for little things like decorating." 4 months? I questioned. "And where did he get the money for all this?" Reed frowned slightly as if my question was inappropriate. His company, Nate Tech, had become very successful in the last year. A breakthrough in artificial intelligence for medical diagnostics. "Didn't he tell you?" "No, Nate didn't tell me anything about breakthroughs or successes. Not a word about a company with his name on it. No hint of sudden wealth." We hadn't talked that much lately," I answered cautiously. Reed nodded understandingly, but there was a look of surprise in his eyes. Or worry. "Come on, I'll show you your rooms," he said, changing the subject. "There's a lovely guest bedroom on the second floor overlooking the garden." We climbed a wide staircase that seemed to float in the air. Dark wood steps with no visible support, glass railings. Another reminder of how alien this world had become to me. The second floor was no less impressive. A long hallway with several doors, large windows in the ceiling, letting in plenty of natural light. "This is your room," Reed opened one of the doors. "I hope you'll be comfortable." The guest bedroom was large and bright. A large bed with a high headboard, a dressing table, a chair by the window that overlooked the well-tended garden with a small pond. Like the rest of the house, the room was decorated in neutral colors: beige, gray, white. "The bathroom is over there," Reed pointed to a door in the corner. "If you need anything, there's a phone in the room. Just press the number 1 and I'll answer it. Dinner is usually served at 7 in the evening, but if you're hungry now, I can get you something." "No thanks, I'm not hungry." I shook my head. "But I'd like to look around the house, if that's okay." Reed's face flashed again with a strange expression, as if my simple request had caused him internal conflict. "Of course," he said at last. "But some of the rooms are closed even to me. Mr. Greenlee's lab in the basement, his office, and his personal suite are restricted areas. I hope you understand." I nodded, though I didn't really understand anything. What secrets could my son keep in his own home? Why couldn't even his own mother enter his office? "Then let's start with what's available," I said, trying to speak easily and casually despite my growing anxiety. Reed walked me through the house, showing me room by room. The living room with panoramic windows, the dining room with its long, solid wood table, the modern kitchen with all sorts of appliances, the home theater, the library with its still half-empty shelves, the guest room on the first floor. Everything was stylish, expensive, and completely impersonal. No photos, no souvenirs, no personal belongings. It was like a house from a catalog, not a place where a real person lived. "And this is where Mr. Greenlee usually eats breakfast," Reed said, showing a small, bright room with a round table and a view to the side of the garden. He prefers a simple meal in the morning: oatmeal, toast, fruit. That was the first detail that struck me as familiar. Nate really has always loved simple breakfasts. I had once made him oatmeal every morning, adding raisins and honey, just the way he'd loved it since he was a kid. And this door leads to the basement. Reed pointed to a metal door at the end of the hallway. That's Mr. Greenlee's lab. I'm afraid we can't go in there. I went to the door and put my hand on the cool metal. Right next to me, just a few feet away, was my son. Why did he seem so far away? What exactly is he developing in his lab? I asked, turning to Reed. The young man visibly tensed. I'm not quite competent in technical details, he replied evasively. Something to do with artificial intelligence and medical diagnostics. Mr. Greenlee doesn't like to discuss his work. I looked at Reed carefully. During our entire tour of the house, he'd never once called my son by his first name, always Mr. Greenlee, always formal and detached. And then there was the constant tension he tried to hide behind professional politeness. Something was wrong. I could feel it. How long have you worked for my son, Mr. Halstead? I asked. A little over 3 months, he replied. Since Mr. Greenlee moved into this house. And what did you do before that? Reed hesitated slightly. I worked in corporate management, coordinated administrative processes in several companies. The answer was smooth, but somehow didn't seem entirely sincere. I couldn't blame him, though. Maybe my maternal instincts were just too heightened by worrying about my son. Shall we go back to the living room? Reed suggested. Or do you want to rest? I think I'll rest for a while, I decided. But first, can you tell me when Nate will be able to see me? I'll let Mr. Greenlee know you're coming as soon as he's done with his current experiment, Reed assured me. He's usually up from the lab by dinner time. I'm sure he'll be glad to see you. I went back to my room, closed the door, and sank into the chair by the window. My mind was swarming with questions that had no answers. How did my son, who only a year ago was an ordinary programmer with a modest income, become the owner of a company and a mansion in a prestigious neighborhood? Why didn't he tell me anything about these changes? And what kind of experiments is he doing in his lab that are so important that he can't even stop to see his mother? But it was Reed's behavior that bothered me the most. Behind his impeccable politeness was something else: wary, anxious, maybe even afraid. He was clearly surprised to see me and seemed unsure how to respond to my questions about his son. I went to the window and looked out at the garden below. Perfectly trimmed bushes, an immaculate lawn, a gurgling fountain in the middle of a pond with ornamental fish. It looked like something out of a glossy magazine, beautiful, expensive, and completely uninhabited. This house was nothing like the Nate I knew. My son had always favored function over beauty, convenience over luxury. He never sought to impress with his living arrangements or lifestyle. What changed? Or maybe I just didn't know my son well enough. I pulled a picture out of my purse that I always carried with me. Nate at the age of 10, standing next to Hank in the front yard of our old house. Both smiling, Nate is holding the model airplane he and his dad had been building for weeks. His eyes glow with pride and happiness. I wonder if his eyes are glowing now as he works in his mysterious lab. Is he happy in this luxurious home that seems so foreign and cold? I had to find out what was going on with my son. And judging by Reed's strange behavior, official explanations might not be enough. I might have to do a little investigating of my own. But first I had to meet Nate. To see his face, to hear his voice, to know if he was still my son, or if the man I knew had disappeared, replaced by the successful but alien Mr. Greenlee, owner of a technology company and a lavish mansion. I opened my suitcase and began unpacking, thinking about my upcoming meeting. What would I say to him? How would I explain my unexpected visit? Would he be happy to see me, or would he see my appearance as an unwelcome intrusion into his new life? The sun was beginning to set, casting a golden glow on the surface of the garden pond. Dinner was still a few hours away. I decided to shower and change my clothes. I wanted to look nice when I finally saw my son. Maybe wear the blue dress he'd given me for Christmas 3 years ago. The bathroom was just like the rest of the house, spacious with a huge walk-in shower, a freestanding tub on curved legs, 2 sinks, and a large full-wall mirror. All in light colors, marble and glass, heated floor. I'd never seen such a luxurious bathroom, not even in the best hotels Hank and I had stayed in on our honeymoon. I took a shower, enjoying the warm jets of water that seemed to fall straight from the ceiling. Then I dried my hair, styled it into a simple but elegant style, and applied light makeup. I put on the blue dress and the pearl earrings Hank had once given me. I looked at my reflection in the mirror, an older but still attractive woman, with a straight back and a determined look. "I'm ready, Nate," I said mentally. "No matter what happens, I'm your mother and I'll be there for you." Back in the room, I noticed the light on my phone blinking. I walked over, pressed the button. "Mrs. Greenlee?" It was Reed's voice. "Minus Mr. Greenlee asked me to tell you that dinner will be served at 7 p.m. in the small dining room. He'll meet you there." "Thank you, Mr. Halstead," I replied. "I'll be ready." It was still an hour before the appointed time. I sat in the chair by the window, thinking about the meeting. Why did Nate choose to see me at dinner instead of right after I arrived? What is he hiding in his lab? And why did his assistant seem so tense every time I asked questions about my son? There was a quiet knock on the door. I opened it and Reed stood on the doorstep with a small tray in his hands. "I thought you might like a cup of tea before dinner," he said with a polite smile. "It's oolong. Mr. Greenlee said it was your favorite." I was touched. Nate really remembered details like that. "Thank you," I accepted the tray. "That's very nice of you." Reed nodded and was about to leave, but I stopped him. "Minus Mr. Halstead," I said. "Is my son all right?" The question was direct, and I watched the young man's reaction carefully. For a moment, his professional mask trembled. His eyebrows shifted slightly, concern flashed in his eyes. But he quickly pulled himself together. "Of course, Mrs. Greenlee," he answered in a steady voice. "Minus Mr. Greenlee is very busy with his new project, but he's all right. Don't worry." But I could already see that second reaction. Something wasn't right, and I was determined to find out what it was. At 7 o'clock sharp, I went down to the small dining room as arranged. Reed met me at the foot of the stairs and ushered me into a cozy room with a round table set for two. Crystal glasses, silverware, fine china. Everything looked expensive and refined, as if it were in a haute cuisine restaurant. "Minus Mr. Greenlee will be joining you in a few minutes," Reed said, pulling out a chair for me. He apologized for the delay. "It's okay," I replied, though I was disappointed. Another delay in seeing the son I hadn't seen in 8 months. Reed poured me a water and walked out, leaving me alone. I looked around. The small dining room was the only really cozy room in the house, warm colors, wood paneling on the walls, soft lighting from a small crystal chandelier. On the wall hung an abstract painting in gold and brown colors, the only decoration in the room. 10 minutes passed, but Nate still hadn't shown up. I began to fidget nervously, tapping my fingers on the table. What could be so important that my son was late for dinner with a mother he hadn't seen in almost a year? 15 minutes after the appointed time, I heard muffled voices outside the door. Someone was arguing, a male voice, presumably Reed's, and a female voice I hadn't heard before. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone seemed tense. Suddenly, the door opened, and Reed walked in with a strained smile on his face. "Mrs. Greenlee, I'm sorry, but Mr. Greenlee won't be able to join you for dinner," he said, avoiding my eyes. He had urgent business to attend to in connection with an ongoing experiment. He asked me to convey his deepest apologies and promised to meet you tomorrow for breakfast. I rose slowly, feeling the anger building up inside. This was too much. "Minus Mr. Halstead," I said in a quiet but firm voice. "I've come a long way to see my son. I'm not going to wait until tomorrow's breakfast. Where is he?" Reed was clearly confused. "He's, in the lab, Mrs. Greenlee, but he's given strict instructions not to disturb him. I'm his mother, Mr. Halstead, not a casual visitor." My voice was calm but firm. "Show me where this laboratory is." "I'm afraid I can't do that." Reed shook his head. "I don't have access to the lab when there's an experiment going on." "Then I'll find it myself," I said, and headed for the door. Reed tried to block my way, but I gave him a look that made him back off. In my long life, I'd learned to look at him in a way that even the most stubborn students knew it was useless to argue. "Mrs. Greenlee, please," he said with genuine concern in his voice. It could be dangerous. Dangerous? I stopped. What do you mean dangerous? What's going on out there? Reed looked like a man caught between two fires. He was clearly hesitating, not knowing what to say. It's it's hard to explain, he finally said. Minus Mr. Greenlee is working on a very delicate project. Any interference could have serious consequences. For whom? I asked demandingly. For the experiment or for my son? Reed didn't answer, and that silence told me more than any words could. Something was seriously wrong, and I was determined to find out what it was. Where is this lab? I asked again. Realizing I wasn't backing down, Reed sighed. It's in the basement, but the door is locked and I don't have the key. Show me. We left the dining room and headed down the hallway toward the same metal door I'd seen on the house tour. Reed was right. The door was locked. Next to it was a panel with a numeric keypad. See? Reed said. We can't get in. I scrutinized the door and the panel, then turned to Reed. You really don't know the code? No. He shook his head. Minus Mr. Greenlee changes it every 3 days. I thought for a moment, then an idea occurred to me. Nate had always used specific dates as passwords. His father's birthday, the year we moved into the new house, the date he'd first assembled the computer. To someone on the outside, they were random numbers, but to us they held special meaning. I walked over to the panel and typed in 6 numbers, the day and month of Hank's birth, and then the year of his death. The panel flashed green and the door opened with a quiet click. Reed stared at me in amazement. How did you? I'm his mother, I answered simply. I know my son. Behind the door was a staircase leading downward. The dim lamps on the walls created a dim illumination. The air was cool and smelled of antiseptic, an unusual odor for a house that smelled more like a hospital. Mrs. Greenlee, please, Reed tried again. You don't have to go down there. You can stay here if you want, I said, starting down the stairs. After a brief hesitation, Reed followed me. The stairs led us down a long hallway with several doors on either side. All of them were closed except for the one at the very end, which had some light coming through and muffled voices. I strode toward that door, my heart beating faster and faster. What would I see in there? Why was Nate so careful to keep what he was doing from me? As I got closer, I could make out voices: a woman's, confident and insistent, and a man's, weak and tired, but clearly my son's. We must continue, the woman said. The results are encouraging, but we need to increase the dose. I'm not sure I can handle a higher concentration, Nate replied. The last time was too... You can handle it, the woman said firmly. You've always been strong, and we don't have a choice if we want to make a breakthrough before. I didn't wait for the end of the sentence and pushed the door open, entering the room. What I saw made me freeze in place. The room was huge, more like a science lab than a part of an apartment building. There were desks with computers and instruments of some kind along the walls. Monitors on the walls displaying graphs and charts. In the center of the room stood something that looked like a hospital bed, surrounded by medical equipment, IVs, monitors, some strange devices whose purpose I didn't understand. And on that bed was my son, half lying there. I barely recognized him. Nate looked terrible, gaunt, pale, with sunken eyes and an almost completely bald head. His right arm was hooked up to an IV, his chest showing sensors wired to monitors. He seemed so frail, so sick, it took my breath away. Standing next to him was a woman of about 45, tall, with dark hair pulled back in a tight bun, wearing a white lab coat. She turned sharply as we entered, her face contorted with surprise and anger. What is the meaning of this? She exclaimed, turning to Reed. Who's that? Mom? Nate's faint voice made me look away from the woman and back at my son. His eyes were filled with surprise and fear. Fear? What are you doing here? I rushed to him, forgetting everything. The strange woman, Reed, the fact that I hadn't been invited to this mysterious lab. Nate, my voice shook. What's wrong with you? Are you sick? I took his hand, so cold, so thin, with veins protruding, bruised from countless injections. Nate tried to smile, but it came out weak and painful. I wanted to tell you, Mom, he said quietly. But I didn't want you to see me like this. I'm afraid you'll have to leave. The woman in the robe came toward us, her voice cold and commanding. We're conducting an important experiment, and any interference could... I'm not going anywhere, I interrupted, not letting go of my son's hand. I'm his mother and I demand an explanation. What's happening to him? Who are you? The woman tightened her lips, clearly unhappy with my tone, but then looked at Nate as if asking for his permission. It's okay, Pam, he said. This is my mother, Mabel. Mom, this is Dr. Pam Vance, an experimental medicine specialist and my partner. Partner? I asked, shifting my gaze from my son to the woman. What do you mean? Business partner, Nate said with a slight smile. I'm flattered by your assumption, though. Even in that state, he hadn't lost his quiet sense of humor. That reassured me a little that my son was still there, inside that weary body. Nate, please. I squeezed his hand. Tell me what's going on. Are you sick? Why didn't you tell me? He sighed, then nodded to Pam and Reed. Leave us alone, please. I need to talk to my mom. The woman looked displeased but complied, nodding for Reed to follow her. When the door closed behind them, Nate tried to sit up higher on the bed. I helped him, adjusting the pillows behind his back. I'm sorry I didn't tell you, he began. I didn't want you to worry. You didn't want me to worry, I repeated bitterly. Nate, look at you. How can I not worry when I see you like this? What's wrong with you? He paused for a moment, as if gathering his thoughts, then said quietly, I have cancer, Mom. An aggressive form of lymphoma. The doctors found it about a year ago. It was like the world stopped. Cancer. My son. My only child. A year ago? I whispered. And you didn't say anything the whole time? I didn't want to bother you at first, Nate said, looking down at his hands. I thought I could handle the usual treatment. But the chemotherapy didn't work and the tumor was resistant, so I started looking for alternative treatments. And I found this. This? I looked around the lab. What's going on here, Nate? He smiled weakly. Remember when I was working on that medical diagnostic program? Artificial intelligence that could analyze medical data and find patterns invisible to the human eye? I nodded. Nate sometimes talked about his projects, though I didn't understand much about the technical details. The program was successful, very successful, he continued. I sold it to a pharmaceutical company for a substantial sum, enough to buy this house and set up a lab. But why? I didn't understand. When it became clear that traditional treatments weren't working, I used my program to develop a new method of therapy, Nate explained, together with Dr. Vance. She's a specialist in unconventional cancer treatments. We use a combination of gene therapy and nanobots to attack cancer cells. Nanobots? I felt a little dizzy. It all sounded like science fiction, not a real treatment. Nate, that sounds dangerous? Experimental? He finished it for me. Yeah, it is. But I had no choice, Mom. Conventional treatments weren't working, and time was running out. Does it work? I asked, trying to make sense of everything I'd heard. Nate shrugged, and the gesture looked painful. We're seeing some improvement. The latest test showed the tumor shrinking by 15%, but the process is slow, and the side effects are complicated. I looked at him carefully, at his pale face, at the dark circles under his eyes, at his gaunt hands. Is this treatment making you like this? Partly, he admitted. Nanobots don't just attack cancer cells, and there are also drugs I have to take to make the therapy more effective. They're pretty toxic. I felt anger building up inside, not at my son, but at this whole situation, at the disease, at this strange woman who seemed to be using my son as a guinea pig. This Dr. Vance, do you trust her? I asked. Nate nodded. She's the best in her field, and the only one who agreed to work on such an experimental method. Why didn't anyone else? My question was direct, and Nate realized what I was asking. Because it's risky, Mom, he answered quietly. Because the chances of success are slim. Because no one wants to mess with unproven methods. But you want to. It wasn't a question, it was a statement. I want to live, he said simply. And I'm willing to take the risk. We didn't talk for a while. I looked at the monitors showing my son's vital signs, heart rate, blood pressure, blood oxygen levels. Everything was below normal but stable. Why didn't you tell me? I finally asked. Why did you hide all this? Nate looked away. I didn't want you to see me like this. Weak, sick. And I knew you'd be against this experimental treatment. You've always been practical, always trusted proven methods. He was right. I've always been skeptical of experiments and risky ventures, but this was my child, my only son. You should have told me, I tried to speak calmly, though my insides clenched with pain and fear. I could have helped, been there for you. I'm sorry, Mom, his voice shook. I thought it was for the best. I gripped his hand tighter, feeling tears come to my eyes. I'm here now, I said, and I'm not going anywhere. We'll get through this together. The door opened and Dr. Vance came back into the lab. She looked a little calmer, but she was still eyeing me warily. I apologize, she said, but we need to continue the procedure. Time is of the essence. I turned toward her, really looking at this woman for the first time. She was a beautiful, cold beauty, correct facial features, clear gray eyes, thin lips. But there was something alarming about her. Overconfidence. Hidden motives? I couldn't pinpoint it, but my motherly heart told me that Dr. Pam Vance was not as simple as she appeared. What is the procedure? I asked. Injecting a new batch of nanobots and an activator drug, she replied, then monitoring the response for 6 hours. And what are the risks? Dr. Vance paused as if weighing how much information to give me. There may be some temporary discomfort, fever, and in rare cases, hallucinations. But all of those symptoms go away within a few hours. I looked at Nate. He looked exhausted, barely able to endure another one of these treatments. But I could see the determination in his eyes. I'll stay with him, I told Dr. Vance. That's impossible, she replied sharply. The procedure requires sterility and… I will stay, I repeated firmly. I will sit on the sidelines and stay out of the way, but I will not leave my son. Dr. Vance was about to object, but Nate interrupted her. Let him stay, Pam. It might, help. The woman frowned, but then nodded. Okay, but you must remain at a distance and not interfere, no matter what happens. Do you understand? I understand, I agreed, though I decided inwardly that I would act as I saw fit if my son was in danger. Reed brought me a chair, and I sat in the corner of the lab, watching Dr. Vance prepare some kind of solution, mixing several liquids in a clear vial. Then she filled a syringe and walked over to the IV connected to Nate's arm. Ready? She asked him. My son took a deep breath and nodded. Ready. I sat back, clenched my hands so tight my knuckles turned white, and watched Dr. Vance inject the contents of the syringe into the IV. The clear liquid slowly flowed down the tube to my son's vein. Now I knew the truth. My Nate was gravely ill, fighting cancer with an experimental treatment that may have been his only chance of survival. And he'd kept it from me, thinking it was for the best. But now I was here and I wasn't going anywhere. Whatever happened next, we would face it together, as a family. I stayed up all night, sitting next to Nate's bed and watching his body react to the injected drug. At first he was shivering as if from extreme cold, then his temperature spiked and his face was covered in sweat. Occasionally he would mumble something incoherent, occasionally cry out, and in rare moments of lucidity he would smile weakly at me and try to reassure me. It's okay, Mom. It's a normal reaction. Dr. Vance periodically came into the lab, checked the readings on the monitors, made notes on a clipboard, and left in silence. Her cold professionalism and lack of emotional response to my son's suffering increasingly disturbed me. Where was the sympathy? Where was the support? Where was the simple human involvement? By morning, Nate's condition had stabilized. His temperature was down, his breathing evened out, and he finally fell into a deep sleep. Reed brought me a cup of hot tea and offered to rest, but I refused to leave my son even for a minute. You can't help him if you collapse from exhaustion, the young man said softly. I'm all right, I replied, though I felt drained. I'm 77, not 97. I can stay up one night. Reed nodded understandingly and walked out. Strangely, this young man, whom I'd been suspicious of at first, now seemed to be my only ally in this strange house. Around 10 in the morning, Nate woke up. His eyes were clear, and to my surprise, a slight blush appeared on his cheeks. He tried to sit up in bed, and I helped him by placing pillows under his back. You should have slept, Mom, he said reproachfully, noticing the dark circles under my eyes. And you should have told me about your illness, I countered. But we both do what we think is right. Nate smiled weakly. You've always been stubborn. The apple of the tree. I took his hand. How are you feeling? Better. He took a deep breath. Surprisingly, better. Usually after a session I feel wrecked all day, but today, something was different. Maybe it's the motherly care? I tried to make a joke, but I had a strange suspicion inside of me. Why exactly did he feel better today? What was different? The lab door opened and Dr. Vance walked in. She wasn't wearing a lab coat today, but an elegant gray suit that accentuated her slender figure. Seeing Nate sitting up and relatively awake, she raised her eyebrows in surprise. "You look good," she remarked, walking over to the bed and checking the readings on the monitor. "Interesting. Good morning, Dr. Vance." I decided to make my presence known. "You look like you're going to a business meeting, not treating a patient." The woman turned to me, and for a moment there was a flash of irritation in her eyes, quickly masked by a professional smile. "I actually have a meeting in an hour," she said, "with potential investors. Our research requires significant funds, Mrs. Greenlee." "Our research?" I interjected. "I thought this was about my son's treatment, not research." Nate interjected, clearly trying to diffuse the growing tension. "It's both treatment and research, Mom. My case may help develop new therapies for other patients in the future." I looked at my son, then back at Dr. Vance. Something about this situation continued to disturb me, but I couldn't pinpoint exactly what it was. "I'd like to talk to Mom alone, Pam," Nate said suddenly. Dr. Vance was clearly not happy about the request, but she nodded. "Sure, but don't tire yourself out. And don't forget to take your meds at 11. Reed will bring them." She walked out, leaving me and my son alone. I noticed how Nate relaxed right away, as if this woman's presence had kept him in a constant state of tension. "Is she always so cold?" I asked when the door closed. Nate smiled weakly. "Pam isn't one to show emotion. She's a scientist to the core. But she really wants to help me, Mom, in her own way." "In her own way," I repeated. "Is this way really helping you?" He paused, as if thinking about the question for the first time. "I don't know," he finally admitted. "The tests show that the tumor is shrinking, but I feel weaker every day. The treatment is very hard." "How much longer are you going to put up with this?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "Pam says we need at least 6 more cycles," Nate answered. "1 a week." "What if we tried something else?" I suggested cautiously. "Get a second opinion?" "There are specialized cancer centers." "Pam's against it," Nate said immediately. "She thinks interrupting the course could be dangerous, and she doesn't want her methods copied." "Do you?" I insisted. "What do you want?" Nate looked away and I noticed his hands trembling slightly. "I just want to survive, Mom, and Pam is giving me a chance." "But at what cost?" I asked gently. "You look exhausted. You're locked in this lab, hooked up to strange devices. It's not a life, Nate. Better this than nothing." He grinned bitterly. I took his hand, noticing how fragile his fingers had become, how the veins protruded beneath the pale skin. "I just want to make sure you know what you're getting into, that you trust this person with a matter of life and death." "I trust her competence," Nate replied after a brief pause. "Her methods are unusual, sometimes controversial, but she knows what she's doing." "And her motives?" I insisted. "Are you sure she really wants to help you and not just use you as an opportunity for her research?" Nate sighed. "Mom, I'm not a naive child. I realize that to Pam, I'm a valuable research case first and foremost. But it works for me as long as her methods work." There was a quiet knock on the door, and Reed appeared with a small tray. "Sorry for the interruption," he said, "but it's time to take your medication." On the tray were several vials of pills and a glass of water. Reed began counting out pills of different colors and sizes, spreading them out on a small plate. "What kind of drugs are these?" I asked, watching the process. "A variety of supportive medications," Reed answered. "For the liver, the kidneys, the immune system. They help the body deal with the side effects of the main treatment." "So you're giving him drugs to help him deal with the effects of other medications?" I sounded clearly skeptical. "All modern cancer treatments have side effects, Mrs. Greenlee," Reed said calmly. "Our approach is no exception." Nate took the pills and sipped them with water, wincing slightly. "They're bitter," he explained, noticing my gaze. but not as bad as the ones from the beginning of the treatment. Reed collected the empty vials and walked out, leaving us alone again. Do you trust him? I asked, nodding at the door behind which the young man had disappeared. Reed? Nate smiled weakly. Yeah, he's a good guy. Cares about me, always attentive. Although sometimes I think he doesn't quite agree with Pam's methods. That interests me. In what way? I've seen them argue a couple times, Nate explained. About dosage, frequency of treatments. Reed thought Pam was rushing things, that I should give my body more time to recover between cycles. And what did she say? She said there wasn't time, Nate shrugged. That we have to be aggressive if we want to beat the disease, I wondered. Maybe Reed could be my ally in this situation. Someone within this strange circle who was also concerned about my son's well-being. How did you meet Dr. Vance in the first place? I asked, trying to put the whole picture together. It was by chance, Nate began. When I was diagnosed and it became clear that the standard treatments weren't working, I started looking for alternatives. I researched scientific articles, patient forums, experimental techniques. I came across Pam's publication about nanotechnology and cancer treatment. I contacted her, suggested a collaboration. Collaboration? I interjected. I offered to fund her research in exchange for a cure, Nate explained. She had the theory and preliminary results, but no money for a full clinical trial. And I had the money from selling my AI for medical diagnostics and motivation to be the first patient. You gave her all your money? I couldn't hide the concern in my voice. Not all of it, but a good part of it, Nate admitted. The equipment, the drugs, the lab, it's all expensive. And Pam doesn't work within the regular medical system, so insurance is useless. What about the contract? I asked. Do you have some kind of formal contract? Sure, Nate nodded. I'm not that lost in my head from being sick. We have a detailed contract that spells out all the terms of our cooperation, my rights as a patient, her duties as a researcher and a doctor. Can I see him? Nate looked surprised. Why, you don't trust Pam? I want to understand what you're getting yourself into, I answered honestly. And yes, I'm not sure I trust Dr. Vance completely. There's something unsettling about the way she's treating you. Nate sighed. A copy of the contract is in my office on the second floor. It's in the top drawer of my desk. You can look at it if you want. I nodded, grateful for that permission. But before I could say anything, the lab door opened again and Dr. Vance walked in. This time she was accompanied by a tall, middle-aged man in an expensive suit. Nathan, she said with a professional smile. Meet Dr. Halstead, one of the potential investors in our project. He would like to see the treatment in person. The man stepped forward, extending his hand. Pleased to meet you, Mr. Greenlee. Your case is, very interesting. Nate shook the outstretched hand weakly. Nice to meet you, doctor. And this is your mother, I presume? The man turned to me, and I noticed that his smile didn't reach his eyes. Yes, Mabel Greenlee, Dr. Vance introduced me. She came to visit her son yesterday, and only found out about his condition when she arrived, I added, not hiding the coldness in my voice. Dr. Halstead raised his eyebrows. Is that so? That's unusual. Nathan chose not to bother his family with his diagnosis, Dr. Vance quickly interjected. Many patients do the same. I understand. The man nodded, but it was obvious that he found the situation strange. And how do you feel about your son's experimental treatment, Mrs. Greenlee? Cautiously, I answered honestly. I would prefer to get the opinion of several specialists before pursuing such a risky course. Dr. Vance visibly tensed. Mrs. Greenlee is not yet fully acquainted with the details of our method, she said with a strained smile. Naturally, she has concerns. More than natural, Dr. Halstead agreed. Your method is really unorthodox, Dr. Vance. I caught a note of skepticism in his tone that immediately interested me. This man didn't seem to be completely convinced of Pam Vance's methods either. But effective, she said with pressure. According to Nathan's latest tests, the tumor had shrunk by 15% in just 2 months of treatment. Impressive, Dr. Halstead nodded. Although, of course, there are side effects to consider. How are you feeling, Mr. Greenlee? Nate paused, obviously searching for words. The treatment is intense, but I believe it's worth it. Of course, The man nodded. Fighting cancer is never easy. Dr. Vance clearly wanted to take the lead in the conversation. Dr. Halstead, let me show you our data in more detail. I have a presentation prepared in my office upstairs. It would be my pleasure, the man agreed. Then he turned to us. It was nice to meet you, Mr. Greenlee, Mrs. Greenlee. I wish you a speedy recovery. They walked out, and I noticed that Nate looked even more exhausted than he had before they arrived. This brief encounter had clearly exhausted him. Who is this doctor? Halstead? I asked. Is he a doctor too? Not exactly. Nate leaned back against the pillows. As I understand it, he represents a group of investors interested in biotechnology. Pam is trying to raise additional funding to expand her research. And you're okay with that? That she's using your case as a demonstration to attract investors? Nate shrugged. If it helps advance research and improve treatment, why not? I looked at my son, so tormented, so vulnerable, and felt the resolve building inside. Something was wrong here, and I was determined to find out what it was. Nate, I said quietly, I want you to be honest with me. Do you really believe that this treatment will help you, or are you just grasping at straws? My son was silent for a long time, staring at the ceiling. Finally, he said quietly, I don't know, Mom. Sometimes I think I've made the right decision, especially when I see positive test results. And sometimes, especially after the procedures, when I feel like I'm dying of pain, I have doubts. Why didn't you tell me? I asked, feeling a lump come up in my throat. We could have found a solution together. I didn't want to bother you, Nate admitted. You'd already lost Hank. I didn't want you to see you lose me too. Stupid, I took his hand. I'm your mother. It's my job to worry about you, and I don't care how old you are. Nate smiled weakly. I know. I'm sorry. We sat in silence, each of us immersed in our own thoughts. I thought about what I'd learned in the last 24 hours about my son's illness, about the strange treatment, about Dr. Vance and her questionable methods. Something about the story didn't add up, and I felt like I had to act fast if I wanted to help Nate. You're tired, I said finally, noticing that his eyelids were getting heavy. You need to rest. Nate nodded. Yeah, a little sleepy. Must be the pills. I helped him get comfortable and waited for him to fall asleep. When his breathing became deep and steady, I quietly left the lab, deciding to take advantage of Dr. Vance's absence to look around. I needed to find Reed. My intuition told me that the young man might know more than he was saying and might not be as loyal to Dr. Vance as he seemed at first glance. And I also needed to take a look at the contract Nate had made with this woman. I was determined to figure out what was really going on in that strange house and save my son, even if it meant going against his will and Dr. Vance's wishes. I went up to the second floor in search of Nate's office. The house was quiet. Dr. Vance and her guests were probably still negotiating somewhere else in the building. I was lucky no one saw me searching my own son's house like a thief. The study was at the end of the hallway, a large room with a large window overlooking the backyard. Unlike the rest of the room, it had a sense of Nate's personality bookshelves of technical reference books he'd collected over the years. A few framed photographs, his old coffee mug with the university logo on it. It was like an island of the old Nate in this foreign, sterile house. I went straight to the desk and opened the top drawer. There was a folder labeled Contract PW, Pam Vance's initials, no doubt. I opened it and began to read the multi-page document. What I saw made me slump in my chair. The contract did indeed provide funding for Dr. Vance's research in exchange for Nate's treatment, but the terms were monstrous. Nate was practically handing over complete control of his treatment to her, with no right to interference from third parties, including other doctors. He pledged to follow all of Dr. Vance's prescriptions, regardless of side effects. And in the event of failure, if the therapy didn't produce the expected results or if Nate's condition worsened significantly, all rights to the research, data, and results still remained with Pam Vance, along with the funds already paid. Moreover, there was a confidentiality clause that prohibited Nate from discussing the details of the treatment with anyone, including family and other medical professionals. Violation of that clause carried serious financial penalties. I continued flipping through the pages, feeling my outrage growing. This was not a medical contract, but a bondage agreement that completely deprived my son of the ability to act in his own best interest. How could he have signed such a thing? But the answer was obvious. Out of desperation, Nate was terrified of a terminal diagnosis, frustrated by the ineffectiveness of conventional treatment, and ready to grasp at any hope, even if it came from a dubious source like Dr. Vance. "What are you doing in Mr. Greenlee's office?" I flinched and turned around. Reed was standing in the doorway, his face anxious. "I was reading the contract my son signed with your boss," I said bluntly, not playing games. "Do you know the terms of that agreement?" Reed paused, then closed the door and stepped closer. "Yes," he said quietly. "I was at the signing. I tried to talk Nathan out of it, but he was determined. It's not a contract, it's slavery." I couldn't contain my anger. "She's completely controlling him, depriving him of an independent opinion, isolating him from his loved ones. It's not treatment, it's manipulation." Reed lowered his eyes. "I know. But Dr. Vance convinced him that it was the only way to get results, that any interference from conventional medicine would ruin the whole process." "And you believe that?" I looked at the young man carefully. He looked up at me, and I could see the inner struggle in his eyes. "I believed it," he said at last. "When I first started working with Dr. Vance, her theories seemed revolutionary, her dedication to science impressive. But then, I saw what was happening to the patients, how she exploits their desperation, how she ignores ethical boundaries for the sake of her research. Have you talked to Nate about this?" "I tried." He shook his head. "But by then, he was completely under her influence. Believed she was the only one who could save him." I wondered. Reed clearly wasn't blindly devoted to Dr. Vance, as I'd suspected at first. Perhaps he could be my ally. "Reed," I said seriously, "I need your help. I have to get my son out of this situation, but I can't do it alone." He hesitated, weighing the risks. "It's dangerous," he finally said. "Dr. Vance is not a person to antagonize. She's influential in certain circles. This is my son's life we're talking about," I said firmly. "I'm willing to take the risk, and I don't care how powerful she is." Reed looked at me for a long moment, then nodded decisively. "Okay, I'll help you, but we need to proceed with caution. Dr. Vance can't suspect anything until we're ready." We devised a plan. Reed was to get proof of Dr. Vance's machinations, copies of her research notes, Nate's real test results, previous patients. I was to get my son ready to move to a real clinic I'd found on the recommendation of an old friend of mine who worked in medicine. That evening, after Dr. Vance left, leaving Reed to monitor Nate's condition, we sprang into action. Reed was able to access her computer and copy key files onto a flash drive. What we discovered was horrifying. Dr. Vance systematically increased the dosage of the experimental drug despite clear signs of toxic effects on Nate's body. She ignored test results showing liver and kidney damage while continuing to insist on an aggressive approach. Her notes listed Nate not as a patient to be cured, but as a valuable research case that could advance her career. But the most shocking thing was that there were 3 patients before Nate. 2 died of multi-organ failure after the 3rd cycle of treatment. The 3rd slipped into a coma with massive brain damage, and all 3 had signed similarly bonded contracts. The next morning, when Nate was feeling strong enough, we showed him everything we'd discovered. His reaction was predictable. First shock, then anger, and finally determination. "We have to stop this," he said firmly after reviewing the evidence. "Find real doctors, real treatment." "I've already contacted the cancer center in the capital," I said. "They're ready to take you in as soon as we can get you there." Nate looked at me with surprise and gratitude. "You've already organized everything?" "Of course," I shrugged. "I'm your mother. It's my job to take care of you, even if you think you're all grown up and independent." For the first time in a long time, he smiled genuinely. "Thank you, Mom." "But there's a problem," Reed interjected. "The contract. Dr. Vance could sue, and given the terms of the agreement, she'd win." "I don't care about the contract," Nate said firmly. "No court would recognize as legitimate an agreement that effectively sentences a man to death, especially with this evidence in our hands." We quickly devised an escape plan. Reed will prepare the car and disable the surveillance systems. I'll gather the necessary items and documents. Nate will clean up as best he can. We'll meet at the garage in 2 hours and leave while Dr. Vance is in a meeting with investors. The plan was simple but effective. At least that's what it seemed to us until we heard the sound of the lab door opening and saw Dr. Vance on the doorstep. "What a touching family gathering," she said coldly as she entered the room. Her gaze fell to the laptop where her files were still open. "And with added entertainment, I see." Reed stood up quickly, blocking the screen with her. "Dr. Vance, we weren't expecting you so early." "Obviously," she gave us an icy stare. "Well, I should have seen it coming. Mothers are always like that. Interfere." She looked at me with undisguised contempt. I straightened up, looking her straight in the eye. "Not just mothers, Dr. Vance. Any normal person would interfere if they saw what was going on in your so-called lab. What you're doing is not treatment. It's torture under the guise of experimentation." "You don't understand anything," she dismissed it. "My work is revolutionary. Yes, there are risks, there are sacrifices. But that's what happens on the road to great discoveries." "Sacrifices?" Nate repeated, his voice shaking with anger. "You're talking about people, Pam, people who trusted you with their lives, and you killed them." "I tried to save them," she argued, but there was no conviction in her voice. "Their condition was too desperate, but you're different, Nathan. You're stronger. Your body responds better to treatment." "You're lying," Nate said firmly. "I've seen the real results of my tests. The tumors only shrunk 5%, not 15% like you claimed, and I'm losing my vision. Sensation in my extremities, all because of your revolutionary methods." Dr. Vance crossed her arms over her chest. "What are you going to do? Walk away? You can't. Our contract." "Screw the contract," Nate interrupted. "No court would recognize an agreement that forced participation in a deadly experiment as legitimate. Shall we test it?" She smiled coldly. "I've got great lawyers and connections. Besides, you're too weak to go anywhere. Your body is dependent on my drugs. You won't last a week without them." "That's another lie," Reed interjected. "I've seen the test results. Yes, going off the drugs will cause withdrawal, but it's not fatal. It's just another way to keep Nathan addicted." Dr. Vance gave her assistant an annihilating look. "You're gonna regret this betrayal, Reed. You're gonna regret it." I saw Nate tense, ready to defend Reed despite his weakness. I had to act decisively. "Dr. Vance," I said calmly, pulling my phone out of my pocket. "This device has a recording of our conversation. And on this flash drive," I pointed to a small drive, "are copies of all your files. We know about your previous patients, how you deliberately concealed side effects, how you falsified results. If you try to stop us, it'll all end up in the hands of the police, the medical board, and the press." Dr. Vance turned pale, but quickly pulled herself together. "You're bluffing," she said, but there was uncertainty in her voice. "You wouldn't dare. Test me." I stepped forward. "I'm a mother protecting her child. Do you really think there's anything I wouldn't do for him?" We stared into each other's eyes. Two women, two opposite worlds. She's cold, calculating, willing to sacrifice others for her own ambition. I'm a mother, willing to do anything for my son. "Okay," she finally said, stepping back. "Take him. But remember, without my treatment, he has little chance." "He has a much better chance with real doctors than with you," I replied. "Reed, assistant. We're leaving now." Reed quickly turned off the monitors and helped Nate out of bed. I supported my son from the other side, feeling him shaking with weakness. "You're going to regret this," Dr. Vance said quietly as we walked past her. "All of you." "The only thing I regret," Nate replied, stopping in front of her, "is that I trusted you, that I didn't see who you really are sooner." We walked slowly up the stairs, Nate struggling with each step. Reed helped him get dressed while I gathered the paperwork and things I needed. Then we went out to the garage where Reed had the car ready. "I'll go with you," he said, helping Nate into the back seat. "If you don't mind, there's nothing else for me to do here." "Sure." I shook his hand gratefully. "We couldn't have done it without you." We pulled out of the garage and headed for the gate. I expected Dr. Vance to try to stop us, to call security or the police, but nothing happened. The gate opened and we pulled onto the road, leaving behind the mansion that had become Nate's prison instead of his home. "Where to now?" Reed asked, sitting behind the wheel. "Central Oncology," I answered. "I've arranged for Dr. Bennett to meet us there. He's one of the best lymphoma specialists in the country." Nate was in the back seat, covered with a blanket, his head resting in my lap. He looked exhausted, but there was hope in his eyes, real hope, not the illusion Dr. Vance was selling him. "Mom," he said quietly, looking up at me. "Thank you. I don't know what I would have done without you." I stroked his cheek, feeling tears come to my throat. "You would have made it," I said. "You've always been strong, like your father." "No," he shook his head weakly. "I was stupid and weak. I let fear cloud my judgment, trusted a quack because she promised an easy solution." "You were sick and scared," I countered. "Anyone in your position could have made that mistake. The important thing is that you're free of it now, and you can get real treatment." Nate closed his eyes, his breathing even. "I'm so tired, Mom. So tired of fighting." "I know, honey." I continued to stroke his cheek. "But you're not alone now. I'm here for you and I'm not going anywhere. We'll get through this together." He smiled weakly, not opening his eyes, and soon fell asleep, exhausted by worry and illness. I looked at his face so gaunt, with dark circles under his eyes and sunken cheeks, and felt my heart clench with pain and determination. I didn't know what lay ahead, whether real treatment would help Nate, whether we were too late, whether Dr. Vance's experiments had done irreparable damage to his body. But I knew one thing. I would be with him to the end, whatever that end might be. The drive to the capital took about 3 hours. Nate slept most of the time, waking occasionally for a drink of water or a change of position. Reed drove steadily, occasionally glancing at us in the rearview mirror. "Do you think she'll follow us?" he asked halfway down the road. "Maybe," I nodded. But now that we had proof of her shenanigans, she'd have to be careful. Besides, Nate's not alone anymore. He has us. Reed smiled. "Yes, he has us. And I'm glad you're here, Mrs. Greenlee. Without you, I don't know how this would have ended." I looked at the road ahead, at the scenery passing by, and thought how strange life is. I came to visit my son, just to say hello, not expecting anything special, and found myself embroiled in a drama with a crazy doctor, experimental treatments, and a fight for the life of my only child. But isn't that what motherhood is all about? To be ready for any twists and turns, to be a support when your child needs it, even if he's in his 40s and thinks he's completely independent. When we pulled up to the cancer center, a modern glass and concrete building, they were already waiting for us. Dr. Bennett, a gray-haired man with kind eyes, personally came out to meet us, accompanied by nurses with a gurney. "Mrs. Greenlee," he shook my hand, "your son is in good hands. We're going to do everything we can." Nate was carefully placed on the gurney and wheeled inside. I walked beside him, holding his hand, and I saw something in his eyes that I hadn't seen in a long time. Hope. Real hope. Not the desperate illusion Dr. Vance was selling him. "It's going to be okay, Mom," he whispered, squeezing my hand. "I can feel it." "I know," I replied, smiling through my tears. "I've always known it." And in that moment, walking into the hospital with my son by my side, I was absolutely certain that no matter how difficult the fight ahead, we would make it through. Together, as a family. Because no disease, no contract, no crazy doctor can resist the determination of a mother protecting her child.